our philosophy is that brand is the being and marketing is the doing. And so many people want to do the doing before they've identified the being. And the being is also what really attracts the employees. And your employees are your first brand advocates. So if they're not, drinking the Kool-Aid and buying into what you're doing, the external will never be in alignment either.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Seven Figure Journey podcast, where we will be discussing the struggles and lessons learned along the journey of a seven-figure entrepreneur. It's my great pleasure to welcome our guest today, Kristen Graham Brown with Hoot Design Company. Kristen, welcome to the call.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You bet. We're excited to hear a little bit more about you and your company. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Kristen, as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, please share with us your story. Where did you start from? Where have you gotten to? And maybe share a few key lessons learned along the way.
Yeah. I started 14 years ago, and I had come from an ad agency background. I should start by saying Hoot is a culture-driven branding agency. And we started 14 years ago, really doing something quite different. We were at that point a retail paper goods is what I would call it. So we did a lot of custom paper for people, a lot of event paper, and then a lot of basically custom artwork is what you could consider it. I was an art director at an ad agency in Chicago prior. And so I kind of wanted to, see what it might be like to try and start my own thing. And I think the grass is always greener. So I thought I want to get away from client work and work retail, or with B2C basically. And that was really rough. So it took me about 5 years to really figure out that I didn't want to do that anymore. So for the first 5 years, that's what we did. In 2015, we really pivoted to be an ad agency. And then in 18, we niched down even more to be a branding agency. So since 18, we've been a branding agency. And since COVID, we've really developed our process for branding. And now I think a really great way to describe us is a culture-driven branding agency, because our approach is really inside out. Our philosophy is that brand is the being and marketing is the doing. And so many people want to do the doing before they've identified the being. And the being is also what really attracts the employees. And your employees are your first brand advocates. So if they're not, drinking the Kool-Aid and buying into what you're doing, the external will never be in alignment either, from either a marketing standpoint or a customer service standpoint. So we're all about building amazing cultures, helping people create the clarity and emotion that gets buy-in from employees and then leads to buy-in from customers and clients.
Gotcha. Very cool. Along this journey, let's go back a little bit further. What got you into this type of work?
Yeah, well, I always knew I wanted to be in advertising, which now as I have my own kids, I know that is kind of rare. Probably from like 12 on, I knew I was obsessed with like visual communication. So not just art, which I've always loved, but really visual communication and how it gets people to take action. And that's just something that is really fascinating and something that I love. I was always really into like print ads and typography and photography and the way that people make decisions based on things that they interact with out in the world. So I never imagined being like a fine artist or anything. So then when I went to school, I graduated and went straight to an ad agency, which is what I wanted to do. And then, from there, it kind of evolved. 5 years later is when I ended up leaving. But I loved that job. I would have been really happy in advertising forever. One of the reasons I left was because I moved to a smaller area where there aren't a bunch of ad agencies. So it was more complicated. And back then you didn't work remote the way you do now.
Right. Gotcha. So you're working with this ad agency, you decide, I'm going to go spin off. I want to do my own thing. Share with us the process of your first hire and starting to build the team and what that looks like.
Yeah. So when I first started, I think a really great opportunity I had was to be an adjunct at a local women's college, which was, really fell into my lap. They were looking for someone to teach the programs in graphic design. I didn't have any other qualifications, but that ended up being a fantastic way for me to like survive over the next 7 years. And it was a wonderful funnel of interns, as you can imagine, like young talent. I
Yeah.
was only like 27 or 28 years old. So I was relatively young, to be a teacher. And so then I would have pretty good relationships with them. They would come over as interns. Some of them grew into employees. So it was really natural, organic growth. One thing I think is unique about being a female business owner is that I think that it's a double-edged sword of like lower expectations. So I don't think anybody ever expected a lot. I don't think my family or my friends or anyone around me ever expected me to become like the breadwinner or a seven-figure entrepreneur. And so that does allow for really organic, slow, low pressure growth. I mean, I think there's a negative side to that as well.
Right.
Of not expect, what's that phrase, like the soft bias of low expectations, is very real. But I really do think that it was a wonderful way to grow really slowly, and without a ton of pressure. For the first 5 years, actually, I worked part-time. So until 15. And then in 15, I really was at a crossroads where I was like, I really need to either do this well and level up, or I need to go get a job. There's a ton of stress for the amount of payout at that point, like the amount of income I was making that was not, did not relate. So that was a really great experience for me of leveling up, of being like, it's time to get real about this. And that's when I really hired, I think at 15, I had a team of 3. 1 was full-time and 2 were part-time. Again, very young staff. That was something that an experience, it's almost like your staff grows with you, as you get older and older, they get older as well. So in the beginning, I was young, they were very young, really young.
Gotcha. And how many team members do you have today?
So now we have about 10, and then it's about 13 with we use 1099s in a way that really allows us to flex with our workload. But I would say those 1099s are very integral to our systems, and they work very closely with our team as almost like employees, but we do allow 1099s to be remote.
Gotcha.
Whereas everyone else, all full-time employees are in the office, and we do 1 day from home, but the rest, the other 4 days we are coming in.
So there's a lot of, back and forth and pros and cons about the whole dynamic between working in office and working remote. Would love to hear your thoughts on why you made the decision to have everybody in office, 4 days a week, and then allow them the day for the working from home.
Yeah, well, so what's interesting about the 1 day work from home, we started doing that in around 2015. And at that time, that was a wonderful carrot to dangle for people. Yeah, it's like, oh, you get to work 1 day from home and we're not going to have any meetings that day. That's the day we want you to make all your appointments and kind of like do your life stuff, which was so progressive at the time.
Yeah,
and now,
absolutely.
Now people are like 1 day, But for us, I think there's so much magic that happens in the exchange of energy, especially creative energy. I mean, that's my only experience. So I only speak from experience there. I think there's so many just magical moments that are shared in an office. I mean, just now, my whole office was gathered around as someone was telling the story about a meeting that they just came out of with a client where the client chose something they didn't expect. And it was so fun. We're laughing. We're all like amazed at what they chose and stuff. And that just doesn't happen asynchronously, right? Because you wouldn't say like, hey, everybody jump on, a Slack or a Zoom right now so we can all huddle up about this. It was something that just happened really organically. Or for example, we're going after an RFP right now and we're making a little video for the client. Now, I'm sure we could do that remote. We could all send in selfie videos remotely, but I think there is something really powerful about what a client sees in the exchange of energy in an office environment. So in this video, you can see that we enjoy each other. You can see that we have fun, and it makes you want to be a part of that too. I think in a way that's really special, which is what we really want to bring to clients. We really want to bring like the fun. Joy is one of our core values. And we really want people to feel like they were so fun to work with. We left better than after, before meeting them, kind of thing. And I think that's really, it's harder and harder to do in a virtual environment.
Yeah, no, awesome. No, I love the insight there, and the intentionality of why you made that decision, and harnessing that energy that is created when you are face to face. Because I mean, let's face it, you really can't mimic that. Yes, you can do a lot of things virtually, but when you are together, there is. And I love that you use the word magic, because it really is. It's this magic that takes place when you're together and you're brainstorming and you're thinking together, or just fun, like you shared, where you're just sharing a story, and you do miss out on some of that when you're all working virtually. So, no, thank you for sharing that. I love that. That's a question that's brought up quite frequently in different communities and with different entrepreneurs that I have the opportunity to work with. Is they're talking about that concept. How do I navigate these? How do I determine they're that? So hopefully that's some good insight for them along this, and anybody else who's in that same boat, who's kind of struggling with that. Awesome. Love your intentionality around pivoting and switching and saying, we really want to do this thing. You said you just started out just like paper pushers, but then now you're like, nope, this is way more in our realm. So now that you've made that decision and you've moved forward and you've had a couple of years, are you still comfortable with that decision? Was that the right path for you and your company?
Yeah, and I think it ended up being even better because, then in 2018, I would not have seen AI coming the way that,
right,
it has arrived this year specifically, or last. So I feel like that became even more of a good, not only a good fit for us, but a good path forward, because I think once you have brand guidelines, especially at the level that we're doing them, which is extremely deep, it's not just like your logo can't be below 2 inches. It's like, who are we? What's the ethos of this place? Especially a founder-led business where often the founder is the heartbeat or the brand. And we want to extract that out and make it something tangible for people outside of the owner. I read this beautiful phrase in Unreasonable Hospitality that language puts intention to intuition. So what is often really intuitive for an owner is not intuitive for a team.
Right.
And I think that's what's really exceptional about doing a branding project, with someone who really does a deep dive with you. It's not just like an aesthetic visual identity, but it's a deep identity about who you are and what you believe and why are we doing this and what makes us different and who are we for and how do we talk to that person. I think is really the exceptional thing that we do.
Awesome. Maybe, if you don't mind, maybe take just a few minutes and describe to us, what's the ideal client for you? What is something that you and your team just get super excited for when, a new client comes up? So ideal client, maybe ideal project. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so we really serve clients in two different ways. It's like almost two different tracks. And eventually I could see that being like a sister company, because I am a big believer in like you're way more powerful talking to one demo. Yeah. I think it makes your work twice as hard when you try to talk to two different people. And we are talking to two different people right now. So that's just some real inside tea that you can know about us. So we work with owner founder led in the 2 to 10 million space. And that's because our process is extremely founder led. So if you're bigger than that, you probably have a CMO or a marketing director, and we might not get access to the founder. And that really erodes the value of our process. So that's why our process is super targeted on that type of business. Now, on the other hand, we also do a lot of employer brand. An employer brand is a really good fit if you have 500 to 5,000 employees. So way different demographic there. It's enterprise level, people who have to have a dedicated budget towards retaining and recruiting talent. So then how do we help them identify, what are their values and what makes them different? Why should you work here versus over here? So it's the same principles that apply, but it's not as founder led. right? It's way
Right.
more, I would say founder informed, but we're rarely talking to a founder or an owner at that level,
Right.
you know, who has that many employees. So,
Great. Yeah. No. Yeah. Talk about total switch in
yeah,
target audience, but
very.
but the work is very similar, just realigned with that target. So no, love that. And
Yeah.
love the
And I
intentionality.
always tell people, that that's really hard for people to narrow down, but it really does make your work twice as hard. And so I battle with it. At least I can say we battle with this ourselves. It's really hard to let go of a demo that you love serving, and go all in on one. So my goal would eventually be just to grow and to split off versus to like shut one or the other down.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and we talk to business owners all the time here at Elite, and we hear that a lot of when I first start out and I'm running my business, it's hard for me not to say yes to everything and everybody. Oh, that's kind of in our wheelhouse. Yeah, we'll try that project. This is kind of what we do. No, we'll try that, right? Because you're wanting to get the cash, you're wanting to get the experience, you're wanting to get the exposure. So you're just like, yes, I'm going to just say yes to everything, and it's not a bad thing, especially when you're first starting out. It's great because it gives you the opportunity to flex your wings a little bit and see, hey, what am I actually capable of doing, and trying these new things and trying out the new clients. Because a lot of times I think small business owners forget that step that, hey, guess what? Just as much as the client is trying you on, you're trying on the client. Because eventually you want to get to a point where you can say, just like you did, very intentionally, these are the type of clients we're looking for. Because when you first start out, yeah, it's not like that. It's, hey, I'll take whatever I can get. Right?
Totally. That's another reason we're a really good fit for this. Is something that took me a little while to establish too. Like, we're a really good fit for 2 to 10 million in revenue because some of those kinks have probably been worked out, right? Like when you're just starting and then you're trying to hire us at an investment level of 35K to do your brand, you really don't have a lot of these answers yet. And then that can be costly, right? Because you think you're going to do X, you end up doing Y. Well, now the brand doesn't fit anymore. So that's another reason getting really specific on that, revenue target even is really helpful. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's fantastic. Great insights there. Well, Kristen, this has just been an absolute pleasure getting to know you, getting to know a little bit about your company. So thank you so much for sharing. I love your intentionality around saying, you know what, this is where we're at today. I'm very aware of it. And in the future, I want to take these two different things. I want to split them off and run them as two separate because I want to get real hyper focused so that we're just creating an absolute wow experience each and every time with our customers. And we're really zoning in and just doing the best that we can. So love that. And that's just such a good insight. So I hope everybody who's listening in pay attention to that. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit. Kristen, as you continue to strive to be the leader that you want to be, and you're growing and developing yourself, and at the same time, you're growing and developing your team and bringing them up to where you want them, and you're trying to figure all these things out in the business. What's something that you're dealing with right now, real time, that we can have a conversation about?
I would say something that has been a really big struggle for us recently is maternity leave. So because we are a team of, 10, it's so small that one person going out can feel really tough. But maternity is something that I really believe in, as a woman led business, especially. I really feel like it's a total tragedy that there's not more societal and governmental support for maternity leave and that small businesses do have to pick up the tab. However, I feel more committed to providing it than I do feel that it's too much of a burden. I think it creates a lot of loyalty. And certainly, because we're really values driven, we're super employee centric because they are our commodity, right? Their time and
Right.
talent is our commodity. So we need people to stay. We need people to bring their all every day. And I have found this to be just a puzzle I can't figure out because financially, you can kind of decide, okay, I'm going to eat, this year specifically, we had 3. So, which is high. That's
Yeah.
not typical on a team of 10, but and it's ending up costing about 26,000, somewhere between 26 and 30,000 to provide the paid leave and to bring in the support to cover them while they're gone.
Right.
On top of that, there's this really unquantifiable amount of burnout that occurs when we are a man down, or in our case, a woman down. So, our team just got shaved 10% off the productivity, and the freelance support helps,
Right.
but it's not the same. And so that means your coworkers, your teammates are picking up the slack. And I think it's which we all want to do because we all believe in this benefit. However, I think it's just this, it's a burden, that it's a puzzle I have not figured out how to manage, from both the burnout state, the workflow management, and then the total cost. Like I said, the two forms of cost,
Right.
the burnout cost and the actual cash cost.
Which are both very relevant.
Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I love that you're bringing this up, because I guarantee you're not alone in this. There's probably so many different small business owners out there in the same realm, trying to navigate these waters and trying to figure out, okay, what is best practice? How do I continue to survive, create that loyalty with those team members, because we have this culture that we care about our team and we want to support them, but at the same time, we still got a business and we still got to run it. And when we're talking 10 people, right, you had 3 this year, which means that for the majority of the year, you only had 7 people. That's a lot.
They went out at separate times, but yes. So they went out. Oh, it's crazy. They almost went back to back to back. So for 9 months of the year, we were a person down. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's 10%.
Yeah.
10 people. That's 10% less productivity, 10% less work getting done, right off the bat. Now, yes, like you said, utilizing the 1099s and bringing in some outside support, we can kind of offset that. But ultimately, usually what happens is exactly how you described. The remaining 9, they kind of wear that load on their shoulders, right? Because they know what has to happen, and they don't want to let it fall by the wayside. 2 reasons. Number 1, because they're loyal to the company and they want to see the company survive. But number 2, because they're also loyal to that employee, and they're like, well, I got you. Well, we're going to make sure that this is totally fine while you're gone, because we want to support you, right? So there's really 2 different things in my mind that you're kind of dealing with. You're dealing with this burnout side, like what you brought up, right? And how do we intentionally find a way to make sure that these 9 that are picking up the quote unquote slack as somebody's out, don't get to the point where they feel burned out and they feel like they're just weighted down? Because years like this, where you've got 9 months of that straight, that's hard, right? And then on the flip side is, how do we also continue to develop this culture where, hey, yes, this is hard, but this is okay. This is something we're choosing because we want to support you as an employee. Because the last thing you want to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but based on the things that you've said already and how you're responding to this, I'm picturing that this is, kind of how you would be on this. Is the last thing you want to do is inadvertently create this culture where they feel like, oh, well, but I can't take this time off because then I know it's going to be a burden on everybody else, and I don't want to be that next burden. So I'm gonna try to find other ways to mitigate this, right? So it's that fine line of, okay, I don't want to burn out, but I also want people to know, hey, we care about you and we got your back, right? No, am I understanding correctly?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say this. I've had this conversation actually, ironically, multiple times in the last year with different business owners that I've had the pleasure to work with. And some things that we've kind of brought to the table to try to, mitigate this and work through it is a few things that I'm going to suggest here. So number 1, let's focus on the burnout. So we've got these 9 employees. They're doing everything they can to love and support this employee who's out taking care of their newborn child, and they're super excited and energized about that. But man, we got a lot of work to do. And I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming you're still trying to grow too.
Mm.
So it's not that, hey, all the workload stopped and we're at this steady workload. It's, hey, we have this workload and we still have these peaks and valleys as we're moving across the road, right? That
Absolutely.
sound right? Okay. So some of the things that I've had conversations with other business owners and they've suggested and said, hey, you know what? This is what really worked for me. Here's a few of them. Number one, the first thing is ahead of time prior to the maternity leave, which is one thing that's actually nice about maternity leave is usually it's not a, hey, in 2 weeks I'm going to be gone.
Totally. Never has been for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So typically, and I could be wrong, there could be some one-offs here, but typically you have a little bit of planning time, a little bit of roadway ahead of that actual time when they leave off. So here's some things that have worked. They've taken that opportunity during that runway and said, okay, who is just absolutely killing it in their big three? So let me take a step back. So in our community, we talk about establishing a big three for each role. Basically, it's KPIs. So in our community, we speak of that as, hey, these are the three most crucial things needed for the success of this role that I'm in. So understanding that makes more sense of this. So what they do is ahead of time, they say, okay, here's our team. You know, Mary, let's say, is going to be leaving in 2 months on maternity leave. So then we go around and we say, okay, who's just crushing it on their big threes? They're just day in, day out. They're just killing it. They're doing really, really, really well. They have been fortunate to not have any bumps in the road in the last little while that have caused them to slow down a little bit and maybe not hit some of their big threes, but they're just absolutely crushing it and things are going smooth. First, we identify those. Then we say, okay, what's your bandwidth look like on a day-to-day basis? And find somebody who's got a little bit more bandwidth than maybe somebody else that's comfortable saying, hey, can we take one item off of Mary's plate and have you start working on that over the next 2 months so that you can get really good at it and just make it be part of your regular workflow? And what we found is you go through the team, you're going to find some that, you know what, they're not in a place and time right now that they are capable of taking any more on. And that's totally fine. And we're happy for them continuing to strive to just crush their big threes. And we're going to support them in that. But in a small team of 10, statistics that we kind of came up with over the couple of companies that we worked with was usually about 30% of that 10 team. So you're talking 3 or 4 of them had enough bandwidth that they were able to take a couple things off of that person's plate ahead of time and integrate that into their day-to-day routine so that they were not feeling like they were being overburdened or overworked or that their bandwidth was being stretched too far because they were already in a comfortable place at that moment in time. So they were easily able to adapt this thing on. By taking those 3 or 4 and starting to remove from Mary's plate, 2 weeks prior to Mary leaving out on maternity leave, she really had almost everything that she did on a daily basis gone off her plate. And what was she doing during those last few weeks as that stuff was shifted off and it really was being owned by those other employees? She started taking some of the stuff off of the other people's plates that bandwidth was already stretched and saying, okay, what's some one-off projects that I can just take off your plate in the interim, in this short period of time, that I can just help you crush and get off your plate so that you don't have to worry about them anymore. So it did 2 things. It set the team up for success when Mary was gone because now, in all reality, it was just the one-off project-based stuff that Mary had to deal with or that the rest of the employees had to deal with that Mary would have been doing because all of her day-to-day stuff was already integrated into everybody else. And it gave this extra boost to the team right before she left because she was able to just knock out of the park a couple of this little loose end projects that the team had been struggling to accomplish. So don't know if that's something that would pertain specifically with you, but with these 2 or 3 companies that we worked with, that really seemed to make a difference when the maternity leave came, because then they already had that overhead coverage of those few individuals, that it wasn't as much of a quote unquote burden. Again, we understand, we've already decided as a team we're going to take on this challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't cause that overwhelming, oh my gosh, I've got so much, I'm so burnt out, I'm so stretched thin, that normally happens, because we were intentional about trying to rectify that ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And it really did make a difference during that time frame that Mary was out on maternity leave.
Oh yeah, I could definitely see that. I think one struggle that we have that I am so curious, like what other people are coming up against in their businesses, because I would say we have like some unique skill sets. So like we have writers, designers, strategists,
Gotcha.
project managers, and brand managers. And then, so there are some jobs that I think can really flex. Design has been one that's been such a struggle for us, like you can't just plop into a design job. But I think that we, certainly there's some silver linings with, like, we found that one of our writers was a really great brand manager. It's not something that she wanted to do long term, but she was willing to do it for 12 weeks to cover someone else. She had a really incredible skill set in it. She just doesn't prefer to do that job moving forward. But yeah, I think that cross training is critical and really helpful. And so probably for us, I'm curious if this is like a unique challenge, that there are people who have jobs that no one else, or only one other. So for example, we have 2 designers. We have a lead designer and someone that reports to her. And they both went on maternity this year. Now, not at the same time.
Thank goodness.
Right? Yeah, thank goodness. Oh, I can't even imagine. But then they were covering the load, right, of the other designer. I did have last year, I had a double whammy where 2 people with the exact same job had a baby 3 days apart. And that we actually did have to hire someone to come in for 3 months full time to work here, which is not typically how we have to approach those.
Right.
That's why I think this is just it is such a handicap for small businesses that I think people don't think about. And I've had people say solutions like, well, don't hire women that age, or, like that's not a solution.
No.
Yeah. Or, so all the people that age should go find jobs at big companies, or they shouldn't have it at all. That it feels so unfair.
Yeah,
and for us, we have to be able to be competitive. Like I was saying, where our people are our commodity, the talent for us is so critical. It's not like, and I'm not saying there are other businesses where you're just like cogs in a machine, but this is the opposite of that, where they're not a dime a dozen.
Yeah. Well, and in most cases, especially when we're talking small business, you are more like that, where each person really does have a very specific skill set, and that's why they're so valuable within the company. And because we're small, we really are wearing multiple hats, all of us. But outside of that, we're usually, there's 1 or 2 people that are really good at 1 or 2 things within the company. And that's what makes us work well together as a group, and as a team.
And that's one of the reasons that it's really inspiring to me to grow, because I think that's a great question. Like when people say they want to grow and people push back and say why, that's something we should all think about. And for me, I think that the handicap that this team takes to provide what I believe is a fundamental benefit is too much. So that really inspires me to want to have a bigger team, because I think even like 15 or 20, we would be a little bit more insulated from this specific burn.
Yeah. Well, and very specific to your example that you gave, where you have just two, a principal and an under, who are doing the same thing and have both then left at the same time. Right? What?
Right.
I had to hire somebody totally new, not in my team, for 3 months because I didn't have a way to do it.
Totally. So yeah. It's wild.
Yeah, it is. And I really like your thoughts there, in saying, hey, that is why part of the reason why I'm intentional about growing, because then I know that I'm going to utilize this information, what I'm learning here now through this maternity issue. I'm going to utilize that to help me decide, okay, as I'm moving forward, as I'm growing, what key people do I need to bring in? So now you're looking at your org chart and you're saying, okay, who is a lone ranger here? That they have a very unique skill set and nobody else can do what they do. That's my next hire. Somebody that can train under them and learn so that I have some overlap. I've worked with a lot of companies that they're very intentional about every time they make a hire, the first thing they do is they go through the whole company and they say, okay, where are we lacking on overlap? What next hire, what skill set do they need to have in order to help us eliminate this issue of overlap? I had the opportunity to have a great conversation with a business owner who is now, very seasonality in his business, but there's times during the year where he's got 150 people that are working for him. And during those times is when, the proof's in the pudding for what he's set up in place. And what he does, and he's very intentional about it in his company, is every single person that gets hired, there's 2 jobs. Their job is to learn what it is they're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. And their job is to learn what their immediate supervisor does on a day-to-day basis.
That's interesting.
So immediately from day one, they're being trained to overlap. So every single role in the company has an overlap coverage.
Yeah.
From the very beginning. And he's very intentional about that because he said, when we first started out and we had a smaller team, it was extremely difficult when somebody got sick, somebody got injured.
Yeah.
Somebody had a family crisis.
Right.
We had to implement this idea of we have to have constant overlap. There's somebody designated in every single role as the person who does the role and as a person who's the coverage or overlap for that role.
Totally.
And then that way they were able to cover their basis. And now he says, hey, when something happens, it doesn't affect productivity or production in any regard. Because it's a simple, smooth transition. Okay, this person covers, this person covers, this person, all the way down the line. So they even have somebody, in the upper leadership team that leaves, and automatically everybody shifts all the way up to that, and they just run seamlessly.
That is very cool.
So that's for some food for thought too. Is you start to grow, and you're intentional about that growth. Make sure that you're paying attention to that and utilizing that as part of that strategy. Is how can I overlap to ensure that I'm setting myself up for the best opportunity for this to impact the business the least when this happens? Because it sounds to me like ultimately that's your goal. You want this to no longer be an issue.
Right.
You want it to be like, oh, you got to leave? Great, no problem.
Yeah.
We support you, we love you, and we're excited for when you're able to come back.
Totally. That would be ideal.
Yeah. So my last thoughts would be, as you're intentional about that, you will get to that point, and you'll be able to look back and go, okay, this is awesome, because now I'm not having that struggle of where I was before, and it's because you were intentional about saying, as I grow, I'm not just going to grow haphazardly. I'm going to grow in a manner that allows me and affords me the opportunity to limit that risk as much as possible moving forward.
Right. Yeah. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, Kristen, it's just been an absolute pleasure getting to know you today. For all those who are listening in, if you want to reach out to Kristen and Hoot Design Company, Kristen, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, so our website is hootdesigncompany.com, and then you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and now TikTok.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, as always, if you heard something on today's episode that you're like, oh, that really hits home, that's something I need to work on, I would ask that you take action, because it's when we take action that things happen. And if we think about something and then let ourselves get sucked back into the day-to-day, we're going to forget about it and it's not going to happen. So take action today on whatever it is that you heard that you're like, ooh, I need to do that. And I promise you're not going to be disappointed in the results. Also, if you heard something today that you're like, you know what, I have a friend or a colleague that they could really use this, share this episode. Let's create as much value with as many people as we possibly can. Well, as always, we are grateful for Kristen being on the show today, and we're grateful for all of you who took the time to listen in on our podcast today. And that concludes this episode of the 7 Figure Journey podcast. And until next time, take care.